masala mix with spicy scrambled eggs, which I make a lot of scrambled eggs. So I'm pretty excited about this one. I'm excited about all of them. I have to admit that you should watch it both from an educational, collaborative education perspective, but also it's kind of changed the, I'm going to have to start over again because the YouTube live stream failed. So we'll kick this off one more time. I've never seen that happen before. It was taking a while for it to go, and then it said connection is timed out. Please try again.
The badge is up on my screen, Alex. I don't know whether you're getting a false reading or that is.
Does anyone see it in YouTube? Otherwise, we're going to have to start it one way or the other.
Yes, it came through on YouTube.
So it's streaming on YouTube, but what it says on the Zoom back end is that it has timed out, and it has a go live button again. So the question is, what will happen if I hit the go live button again? Let's find out. Let's find out right now. We'll do it together.
It streams in 4K.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, it's gonna. Now the question is are we going to get it in stereo? Hi everyone.
Wow.
Hi everyone. If you're watching this, if you're watching this, you may see two of these, and we're trying to. Oh, now we have another one here. So it just went back into it. So for those of you who are wondering what was confusing there, the Zoom back end failed, even though the stream continued to go. The Zoom back end itself told me that it had timed down. So we stopped there for a second. Anyway, so I don't know what the rest of the announcements are. We're just going to go to the questions. All right, take it away, Bill.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. Our first question this morning comes from Mitchell Hill, or this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. And he says, should Office Hours panel consider creating short, instructive videos using the knowledge resources available here?
Go ahead, Bill.
And the answer probably should be yes, if you say considered. But as I've always said, creating good training of any kind takes a lot of effort. I'm reminded of the old Blaise Pascal's quote, I would have written you a shorter letter if I had more time. And he actually said that in much more words. It is really hard to be concise and to do something well. So it takes a lot of effort to do those. It would be great if we could, and the accumulated wisdom here is amazing, as I think everybody who watches the shows understand. But asking people to actually create tight pieces of programming is a big ask. So it'd be great if we could do it, but you kind of don't know how you'd work that into a system.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't know if it's polite to answer your own question, but the genesis of the idea and the reason I asked a question is that I've been meaning to do a YouTube video in 3 parts. We'll call it part 1, part 2, and part 3. And the idea is to teach potential users how to improve the quality of their Zoom call, but start with the basics and then move on. And as I got to thinking about doing it myself, I said, well, why would I do it myself when I've got all of these people here that are all experts? So if we're talking about lighting, there's a group of people that understand lighting. If you want to talk about audio, we got audio covered. So just sort of break it down. I just thought it would be good to bring in the Office Hours crew, sort of as almost like an interview, or here's Alex talking about whatever, and that's basically what I'm thinking. It would be interesting, short, concise, something people can refer to.
Good, David.
I think a lot of us already do create those videos. And if you hop into the Discord, a lot of people post links there to their work, and you can certainly reach out to any of us and ask.
Go ahead, Stuart.
This is actually a subject that's been weighing on me for this entire week while I've endured a Zoom meeting in the morning with people who don't have this level of audio or this level of lighting. And there's a lot of people out there who simply can't afford to spend what some of us have spent. So I was actually thinking of creating a couple of videos that are based around maximizing the output through the Zoom client and through like on phones and phones only, because everybody has some sort of phone. So I might be calling on a couple of people to help out with that and be the ruthless reviewers while I set myself up to fail to learn how to do this properly with an Android phone. So,
yeah, I think that there is a bunch of opportunities there. So definitely the intention as we go into the 2.0 and we start moving to the new YouTube channel is to provide the opportunity for us to work on videos together that are of a wide variety of everything from how to do better Zoom calls, but also how to understand cameras and how to, deal with gain structure and how to, there's lots and lots of subjects that we could be putting up. And I think that we want to think about it. The advantage that we have is we have so many people that have so much knowledge that we can really turn it into, I think it could actually be much more knowledgeable as a group than any one of us, and definitely most of the content that's out there. There's some great folks out there doing some of those videos, but I think we can do our own style of those. I think that for folks that are already producing content for their own YouTube channels, I'll continue to produce stuff on my channel once we move this off. The opportunity is really that you can, a lot of YouTubers use a central channel to amplify what they're doing. So you have a lot of videos. They can't produce that many videos, but you have a lot of people producing those videos. And then, but they definitely in their links, of saying like, this is David Paskin does a video. Here's a link in the video to his YouTube channel if you want to see more of what he does. So the idea is to use the channel as a way to amplify and promote other people within it and their own channels. But it would produce a lot of content that theoretically could end up getting more as an aggregate. If we're all producing great content together and we're all talking about it and producing it, we could end up with a very large following along with all the other stuff that we're doing here. And so I think and then that helps us seed and support other members in their own channels and so on and so forth. So I think that is, that's my goal, and the same thing with the website where we will have blog posts, and maybe the blog posts go with in a perfect world, the blog posts go with the video post. So we post a blog post that has all the text that you'd want to have related to that, just a handful of it. And here's a video. So I think a lot of times YouTubers only think in video and bloggers only think, or people only think in text. What if we had both of those things? And so there's a place for that, I think to go back and forth. Like here are the actual settings need to be somewhere other than the video. And so you see that a little bit in what we're doing with Damayanti's cooking, where there's a recipe and there's a video and then there's a live portion, and all of those things can be kind of put together. So anyway, so that's I think that I'm definitely behind that. And I think that's probably the direction we'll try to go. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next, and he asks, software subscriptions versus purchase was discussed yesterday. In the modern day of vulnerability exploits and underlying operating systems continuously being updated, what's the business model for software venues to offer software at a one-time fee?
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, Waves, the audio maker, what they do is they offer something called WUP, Waves Up-to-Date Plan. And what it does is it updates your software for a fee to the latest operating system. You don't have to pay WUP. You could lock down your system and stick with a certain operating system or not. And then other software vendors that I see on the App Store, they add a Pro or a Plus or a number to get the customer to pay for the updated software. I think it's a good idea that you have to pay the software developer for updates. I have no problem with that. Just the subscription model is my problem personally. And I'd like to see Chris's Fenwick's face every time I say that, because he's like completely aghast.
Sky.
I would put the subscription is allowing the software company to continue to create and know what the revenue is. And so that's where, when it first came out, I was also against it, because I was using, 10-year-old software on 10-year-old hardware and making a living. But when the manufacturer said, we want to progress, and we iterate. And again, what you're receiving is not something that has been completed. It's never finished. So I think we're going to be leasing to get into the experience moving forward, because, and how do you partner with the manufacturer, with the Johns of the world that need to make a living, but still iterate moving forward?
Go ahead, Ken.
Being in the WordPress world, where a lot of software is lots free software, there's lots of software you pay one-off and what software you pay subscription. The software I use on sites I build, all subscription models. The developers, the reason why some had a paid option and then they changed to be all subscription. The reason for that is so that they can continually develop and improve their software. And so I always look for ones who have a paying model, knowing that then I can get good support for the software that I use.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm on the other side of this. I'm not a big believer in subscriptions, and here's why. I did a count on the number of applications I have installed on my machine when I first saw this question this morning. I have 238. Of those, probably 100, I would say, are actual active pieces of software that I use. So even at $5 a month, I would be looking at $500 a month just to operate the way I do now. That is, I think, excessive. There are certain apps that I believe are worth constantly paying for, but they are, for me, the apps that you use daily and apps that do not put unnecessary restrictions on me. And whenever I think of subscription, I think of the difference between, for example, the Adobe model and the Apple model of this. Apple sells software at one price, you buy it, it's yours, they upgrade it. They have as many upgrades as Adobe has. Adobe, and they're a fine company, but their subscription model is one that if you stop paying the subscription, you are locked out of the software until you pay again. There are different subscription type models. That's one. There's another one, like, for example, lynda.com does, where you pay a subscription, but as soon as you stop paying it, you are stop accessing their content. That, to me, is the correct intellectual property decision, because it's their property that I'm accessing while I'm paying, and I stop accessing their property when I stop paying. In the case of something like a subscription software for a tool you use to make your living, if I stop paying and they cut me off from that ability to access my own intellectual property, I have a problem with that. That's kind of where I fall on this spectrum.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm with Bill on this because I bought all of my Adobe products all along. I mean, 10, 20 years ago. And all of a sudden the subscription came along and I went to the subscription. And now they're basically saying everything that you bought up to the subscription is no longer relevant. The subscription is now relevant. So if you stop paying your subscription, you can't use even the versions of the software that you purchased, which I have sitting on the shelf back here.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and what is your revenue source? Apple, the software is the loss leader for the hardware. They give the software because it forces you to buy their hardware. Adobe only has the software as their product. So John Baker has to make money from making software.
Go ahead, Rupert.
This is kind of falling back to, I think, what was discussed yesterday. I'm coming at this from a vulnerability point of view. If you look at all these, cybersecurity issues we have these days, and, crypto, whatever, and things getting locked out and people, getting into a mess, it's almost always because they have some piece of software that is unpatched, or there's some vulnerability in it, or that it needs to be immediately patched. And I'm just curious to get the feeling of what expectation one can have of having protection and support from the vendor in situations like that, when it may be something that you purchased long ago. And really, what relationship do you have with them now for them to be able to provide you with support for security?
You go ahead, Andy.
One of the things I didn't realize until I started a software company was how the market values your company based on subscriptions versus one-time purchases. And this is kind of the scary truth of why companies are doing this. For a subscription, like a monthly subscription that I can do right now, I can have 12 times the value, 12 times the market value of that license if it's on a subscription versus as a one-time purchase. So if your company is trying to get acquired or you're getting valued or things like that, a subscription is astronomical in this specific market. Usually it's a 6 to 7 times multiplier, but in the current market, it's 12x. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of companies rolling to this model. In addition to everything Rupert said about continuous income, being able to fund stability updates and improvements, the fact of the matter is it's a hot market right now for software. And by licensing via this model, the value in the marketplace is dramatically increased.
Yeah, I think that what I like are the ones that the subscription models that, and I'll get back to Rupert's point in just a second, but the subscription model that lets you also rent it for a day or two or a week or whatever, and say, okay, I need it for this job and I can turn it on and off, and they make it easy to just turn it on and off. I think it's the ones that I really find egregious are the ones that are like, you can only sign up for a year. It's this much a month, but you can only sign up for a year, like TeamViewer. Not that I'm bitter. And so anyway, so those are the kind of things that I think get a little nutty, because you're basically purchasing it at that point. You're getting that. And so as far as security goes, I know that if you're not a well-known company, I won't buy a piece of software from you outside the App Store under $50. Okay, just like you have to have something that like literally levitates for me to go, oh, I'm going to buy, like literally I want to see it levitating out in my backyard in the demo before I'm going to buy it, because I don't want to deal with your serial numbers. I don't want to deal with logging in. I mean, security is a part of it, but I just don't want to deal with, well, like when I go through so many computers, I get up on the App Store and I turn it on and I just go install all these things, and I walk away for lunch and I come back and everything's installed and working, and so, there are specific things that, services, and again, things like, I mean, there are unique things like Zoom ISO is a good example of something that's unique, and Isadora is something that's unique, and that I might go, okay, well, that's something that we need to, do something with. But but for most little things, if I can choose between the same service inside the App Store versus outside the App Store, I'll pick inside the App Store, because it is just, and as a software developer, I wouldn't bother unless I was doing something that's like a service. If I was doing an app, I wouldn't ever develop outside of the App Store because I used to sell software and I know what it takes to support it, and I know what it takes to license it, and I know what it takes to do all those things. And there's no way that I would bother to do that anymore. It's a secure system that has very little piracy, that has, that's easy to use, that people can work on. So on the PC side, I don't know how to do that, but I would say that the stores are going to be more and more important as we keep going forward. And platforms that allow you, like, I think it's nuts every time someone builds something like Fusion for Blackmagic, or, not taking advantage of the ecosystem. Like if I was Apple, I would be selling all those plugins that are made for Final Cut and Motion inside the app. Like I'd build an app store inside the app where people could just securely pull those things in as they want to, as opposed to externalizing that. I always feel like that's just leaving a lot on the table. Next question.
Moving on, we have Guy Cochran in Seattle who asks, what's new with Rode's $79 USB audio adapter? And he has a link there.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, this is a cute little guy, actually. I saw the announcement yesterday. Obviously, it has its limitations. It's only 3.5 millimeter in. It's got two of them. It's got a dedicated headphone out, and then it connects via USB-C. For my money, the real benefit of this is that it does work with the Rode Connect software. So you can actually have a little more control over your audio. But limitation and input, benefit of the Rode Connect software.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, it also, the 3.5 mil can take ones with a sleeve or double tip sleeve. It automatically knows the right connection. So that's what's good. And also then you can remotely, with the Rode software, it means that you could send it out in a kit and you can then remotely log in and adjust the audio levels or even mute the mic.
It's got TRS, TRRS, TRRRS. I don't even know what TRRRS is, but it'll see it. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, that's the AI part of it. I think it intelligently determines what you've plugged into it and configures itself appropriately for whatever you plug into it. The thing I like about it, I know people talk about it in terms of the Rode ecosystem, but I think even for podcasters and for folks who just want a general interface, be able to use the new generation of digital, less expensive microphones to feed this thing, it's going to turn out to be pretty popular, I think, as everybody gets to understand what it is. I think they've done a really good job here. Good job, Rode.
Yeah, I was excited. I went the first day and I couldn't order it. It was made of unobtainium, and I couldn't order it. And now, fortunately, it's now available for folks in the United States from the DBE store. So I just went up to buy it today, and it clicked through. So I was like, okay, well they were a little late on the implementation on their website, but I'm glad to see it. So anyway, next question.
Moving on, Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel. The BBC has set a target to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030. The BBC is the world's largest broadcaster by number of employees. In what ways might the biggest carbon savings be made for any broadcaster?
Go ahead, Dennis.
So the first thing to say would be do the big things first. If you stop emitting carbon earlier, you're going to emit less carbon overall. Insulating buildings would be one of the first things to go for, because then you're not throwing away heat out of the walls and windows. Reduce energy usage as much as possible, so turn things off that aren't being used. Remove fossil fuels where possible. So if, for example, heating is coming from fossil fuels, then look for air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, that sort of thing. Ensure that electricity is coming from renewable sources rather than from fossil fuels, and reduce travel to a minimum.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, I'm looking at what is their product. Their product is content, and their content is often news. I subscribe to the BBC World Service, and I'm wondering about the public journalism aspect of this. That way you don't have to ship a reporter to the far corners of the world, but you get information in, because now technology allows you to get information in from far corners of the world without sending a body to that location. So, and I know, Alex, you've got history with that concept. I'd be very interested in hearing that.
I will say that I think it's the shipping the reporters is kind of a scratch on the surface. It's the commute of all your employees. That's the number one impact. Work from home is the number one impact that almost any company can do to carbon. That's what's like, literally the commute of thousands of employees to a location dwarfs almost everything else that they're doing. Go ahead, Stuart.
The problem with the answers we've just heard is they rely on management that respects employees. Sadly, a lot of the places around the world, that's not normal operating procedure. So the two biggest expenses every business has is wages and maintenance. And the easiest thing that they can do to reduce their carbon offset and reduce costs is literally reduce the number of staff they have, which, if they don't respect the staff, they will just shed staff, and they will regret it later as their service quality drops. So just be aware that not all companies do things based on what's good for the world. They do things on what's good for profits.
I can tell you what they shouldn't do is they shouldn't turn the heat up. I was in DC. We were in a Leeds whatever building. I don't know, some crazy star badge or something. And they turned the air conditioning off in the weekends, and then they would keep the heat at like 74 degrees. And the number of behaviors that it created inside of all the employees to do things that were completely, like, we just put air conditioners, like individual air conditioners in all of our rooms, and then pumped massive amounts of things, because we were trying to offset the fact that they were creating a lead system that completely destroyed our ability to work. So to get back to what Stuart was talking about, is they were trying to fix it. So I don't know how to fix it, but I know how not to fix it, because you just end up with a bunch of upset employees that just start finding ways to work around the system. You have to find ways that are going to actually not be painful, and work from home, I still will argue, is the number one for almost every company to reduce the problem is they're not tracking that. They're tracking how much they burn. But as soon as they go, well, how about your employees driving in, you're gonna find that there's a massive number there and a lot of people are paying a lot of attention to that right now. The studies are working their way through the system of how to attack work commutes, because of what just happened. Next question.
Michael Andreas in Kansas is up next. And Michael says, looking for purchasing the Heil PR40, which does not come with a pop filter. What's the selection criteria for the smaller clamp-on pop filter, which I see so many using?
Go ahead, David.
I got mine from ZenPro Audio, which is zenproaudio.com, excuse me, for $60.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, it's the one piece of the kit that Heil don't make, and there are other that you have to get it from a third party. The issue I would have would look for the one that I have. I like it because it's got a very long arm, so it means the clamp goes around the body of the mic rather than where the grill of the mic is. So I'll put a link in the description where I got my particular one from.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have gotten them from BSW. BSW sells them in the United States, and they're fairly effective. Next question.
Rupert McRae is back from Dallas, Texas with the next one. Will there be a fixed number of SuperSource box aspect ratios to Office Hours 2.0 for predictable framing? Can we have a single grid template that accounts for different shots?
And this probably wanted to be a different hour, but I will say that we're kind of experimenting with that. I mean, the main thing is we want everybody to be in the center because it'll be wide and thin. But we do need people to be center framed. I think that's the most important piece. Go ahead, Alex.
One just a silly option, given the fact that I don't have any kind of software handling my video link through to Zoom, it would be nice to have a version of the guide which actually could temporarily use as a virtual background to line yourself up that was a little bit stronger, so that you'd know where your head is actually in the black area or the white area, and actually temporarily use it as a temporary background. It's just a thought for a slightly different design.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Next question.
Moving on to Carol Hendon in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. I use Audio-Technica's mic system. My speaker has Shure over-the-ears mics. Is Hixman CA603 adapter, that adapter from Amazon, a good adapter for me to purchase?
And sorry, I got myself into the wrong page there. Hixman 603 adapter. Has anyone seen this? I don't know if...
The Hixman CA603 to be specific. I've never run across one.
It is a it's like a TA4 to it should work. I mean, if you're using an Audio-Technica, this is a wireless it's an adapter for the wireless transmitter. It looks like a Audio-Technica. It looks like a TA4. And what is she trying over the ear? I think so. I mean, it's hard to know because we would need to technically know. I know it's an Audio-Technica system, but I'm not sure if we know exactly what all the devices are that it has to plug in and out of. I think that's the challenge there. So yeah, maybe send that back to us. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, for balanced microphone systems, you need 3 wires for it to operate. Positive respect to ground and negative respect to ground and the ground. So if it's a TA4, there's going to be 4 wires possible, and 3 wires of them have to be configured correctly to make the thing work correctly. So just this is something I think you'd want to call technical in those 2 things and see if the way they wire both sides of that pass through the balance signal correctly so that your system is optimized.
Yeah. Next question.
Bo Cordell from Charleston, South Carolina is up next. And Bo asks, about LinkedIn, I've gotten jobs via word of mouth for the last 15 years. Is it worth putting time and effort into LinkedIn or other socials?
Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know. I actually just did my second post to LinkedIn this year today. But I'm getting the impression at the moment that people who see me here or see me on Twitter, they actually might, if they want to see me in a professional sort of way, have been checking me out a little bit on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very good at hiding what is a real checkout, or more the fact it's algorithmic. Essentially, if one office hours person is now linked to one other office hours person, then actually really all the office hours people are now being proposed to me, or vice versa. So I'm not quite sure what's going on, but I'll give it a go for a while. And so my guess is maybe a little, although it'd be interesting to have, maybe we'll get together at some point on after hours and schedule a time when we can swap tips associated with LinkedIn.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Extending on Alex's point there, I mean, it's, if your name does get passed around by word of mouth, LinkedIn is an option for that communication to continue and people to reach out to you once they hear your name or pick it up. But it can also depend on whether you're looking for or open to employment work or contract work or freelance work, and the variables are there a little differently. Recruiters, I think, are pretty active on LinkedIn in general, but I think more to the point, LinkedIn, it's worth investing some time in LinkedIn in general, because it's a really good source of industry news and what either companies post on there, or what the employees or key figures of companies post on there. It's a good way of keeping up to date, and that's just a good thing all around.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I ignored it for a long time, and just in the last maybe 6 months, I've stopped ignoring it so much and spent a little more time paying attention to it. Overall, I tend to think of it as a shirt and tie kind of service. It has that kind of corporate sheen to it. Most of the content I see there is not black t-shirt folks telling you how to do things, but more the administrative side of the world. And those are the people sometimes who have work to pass around. So I'm spending more time on it and paying attention to it than I ever have before, even though that's not the kind of work that I think I'm going to eventually end up doing a lot of.
Yeah, I've been using LinkedIn almost since it came out, and I kind of casually, people will ping me on LinkedIn. People will I end up with a lot of communication on LinkedIn. I probably communicate with people more on LinkedIn than anything else. I check into Facebook Messenger like every 2 weeks and apologize to everyone. I'm sorry, I'm not here very often. So and I answer it really late, and then I go back to what I'm doing. So LinkedIn is probably the number one place that I communicate with other people that I work with, outside of email and Discord and text and so on and so forth. And so I find it to be pretty useful as far as a platform goes. I think that especially when you've done it long enough and people have done all those little recommendations and everything else that they do there, that when you ping somebody and say, hey, I'm interested in working with you or whatever, I have the pro version of LinkedIn where you get to see everybody who looked at your profile. So also be careful of that too, because yes, if you have a pro version, you see every person that came to your profile, and I can see like, oh, I had a conversation with that person, or I pinged them, and I can see them look at me in LinkedIn. So they're checking my CV, so to speak, every time I'm doing it. So having that, I would argue that your LinkedIn page as an individual is probably more important than any kind of personal website or anything else. That tells people what they need to know when they're looking for it, probably in a more structured way than any kind of personal website. I think social media obviously makes a lot of sense in certain areas. You should be really careful of social media. Like, be really careful of you'll find that I have a lot of opinions that I put in social media, but it's in a very thin strand of things that I talk about, because you just want to be really, you can't take it back. You can't delete it. Just so you know, you can't delete your tweets. You can't delete, because there's crawlers that are grabbing all of that stuff. I had a fairly high profile political figure not want to have me work for them because of something I'd said 8 years before on Twitter. I couldn't even find it. Like, I couldn't even figure out what I'd said, but they were very upset about it. And so the thing is that, and it was like right after Twitter had begun, so it was kind of like one of those things, like, we were all just playing with it and being absurd. And so you just have to be super, like, you should, I'm always amazed at how people use their social media. That's all. like I use it in a very, very calculated way. And I find when people put stuff up that is their political opinions or other things like that, or just whimsical stuff that isn't, even my whimsical stuff has some meaning or some plan. But I think that unmanaged, you can really damage your ability to get things done. So just be careful with social media in general. It's what we call fissionable material. Next question.
Dennis Champion Walker, here in the panel from Southend-on-Sea in the UK, asks, in a conventionally non-remote work environment, house of worship, for example, what are the tips for negotiating more remote work into your next contract? I'd like to work remotely at least 1 month a year in my next contract.
Go ahead, David.
I'd say to win that argument, you need to show two things. Number one, what's possible. The creative and the unique ways that you can get your work done and not only do it differently, but perhaps even better. And second, that you can do this well.
Go ahead, Rupert.
A specific time window like that, 1 month, in 1 year, what will be important there is consistency. You want to show that that you're going to provide the same productivity or whatever it is, whether you are in or out of the office. If it was a longer time period or you wanted to go more remote, then you could bring in other debates like the environmental savings and the fact that you probably have better setups at home if you're going to work from home than you could have in the office, whether it be space or equipment or workflow.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Well, and as David has already expressed, and Rupert both, is what is the value that you are bringing to the service that you're providing, and what is the problem that you are solving? But more importantly, you need to be solving their problem and bringing more value or value add that being remote would give it additional services that they may not have thought of. But again, unless it's important to them, they don't understand it. And so how do you promote yourself as, giving more than what you did before?
Here's the hard truth. The easiest way to make that improvement is to get another job. Like, that's why everyone's moving right now. Like, if you're watching, like 70% of Americans right now, American employees are looking at moving to another job. And a big piece of that is the easiest way to get a significant change in your work environment is to go somewhere else. And that, no one wants to say that, but that's how you make major adjustments to your lifestyle. is you go somewhere where you're negotiating that from the ground up, not from trying to get something to change that doesn't want to change. But that's what no one wants to say. And that's what I've done every single time that I've ever moved from one place to another. Like, this doesn't work anymore. And you just find another place to go that already has what you're looking for in that process. And so I think that if you're really committed to where you're at, then it's a matter of softly trying to do all the things that were just said. But the fastest way to do it is to go get another job. Like to take what you already have. The easiest time to get a job is when you have one. So while you have one, use it, and that's when you pep up your LinkedIn. Every time someone sends me a bunch of LinkedIn connections, it's more normal now. I was like, oh, somebody's looking for a job. All right, next question.
Carol Herndon in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, back with using Blackmagic's Ultra Studio Mini Recorder to capture slides via SDI. It works if I pass it through a decimator scaler, but does not work using native signals through decimators MDLX with no scaler, regardless of what resolution I send. Solutions.
Yeah, I think it's because it's 30p. So I think that what's happening is it's getting a 30p signal into a mini recorder. In some cases, will not handle that. So you need to have it. It should handle it, but that's usually a 30p issue. It's not getting a signal that it expects to get. Next question.
Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham, Washington says, I've been tasked with getting badge printers for our 250 in-person annual conference. Thinking about renting. Does anybody have any tips or advice? We're also thinking of renting the laptops to run the printers also.
So 250 is not that much for a badge printer, and they're not that expensive. The big thing you want to think about is what added features do you want on them. So a basic badge printer will cost you about $600 or $700. I don't know what you rent them for. I've never seen anybody actually rent them. The ones that are cool are the ones that have hologram. You can get hologram imaging. You can get strips on them if you want them on the back. You can get RFIDs in them. So there's a bunch of different things. Well, that's just the cards that you're buying. We used to have one because that's what we printed our media passes on. So for the company, so that we could get cheaper luggage. So we bought a couple of them to make that work. But if you think about the flow of 250 people coming in, you wouldn't need more than two of them. And I've never rented them, so I have no idea how much. I didn't even know you could. Go ahead, Stuart. I'm sure you can.
Oddly enough, in the 90s, I worked for an AV company that used to rent out badge printing and card reading machines with the optical readers. They're the ones that are about that size that you wore in a sleeve. Yeah, it's cheaper to rent them because not for the actual devices themselves, but because you can write it off as a business expense.
Yeah, the hard part is that when you rent stuff like that, there's a lot of moving parts inside of that thing, and so just make sure that it works. Like it's renting something that's under high use that isn't rented very, very much. You just want to make sure that you. I'd be probably tempted to buy one and rent a couple so that I could test it and make sure it's working, and then I had a couple extra to handle flow, but I always had one that I knew was brand new because nothing like having a break with a long line. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer of Florida says, as we move to reopen offices, what steps can be taken to unify the experience between single camera remote speakers and those in an office conference room? Zoom's Smart Gallery is a first attempt, he says, per quality. Perhaps this is a good second hour topic.
Go ahead, Alex.
I would not put the people on location into the same conference room. I'd just let them be in their own offices. Or if they are in the same room, give them a noise cancelling headphones so they don't talk to each other, or they realize they're actually on an event where other people don't get the kind of ambient noise around them unless everybody's mic'd. So better to artificially separate the people who are together so that they're separated to the same extent as the people who are connecting on the kiddies table.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, exactly. There's no perfect solution here. There's probably no even solution. I mean, the Smart Gallery thing is an attempt to kind of band-aid the problem, but when you've seen these scenarios play out, I've seen conference rooms with people in a horseshoe table or with their necks strained trying to look at a screen 20 feet away, and that means then the presenters have to be mindful of their content, because if they're sharing content which they've anticipated will be looked at by somebody on a screen in front of them, that may not work at a 20-foot distance, and then you do have all the audio issues that have been talked about.
Yeah, conference rooms are a disaster. as someone who's been on the tail end, on the far end of conference rooms for a long time. I don't even like them when I'm in them. Like so the thing is that there's no, in the era of we have webcams and we have our offices. I think that companies would be better off isolating, getting rid of that open desk, complete disaster that they created, and create some isolation and let people just jump into meetings, because it is so much more effective than the conference room will be. And it's just a matter of, it's just, we're in the next 10 years that most of that I think will go away. Like the idea of conference rooms will go away. There'll be things that you bring people in for a lab, but on a day-to-day when we're having, let's go into a conference room so we can all talk, is not efficient. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I just want to mention that Owl, we've talked about the Owl camera before. They just announced yesterday, I think a couple of days ago, 2 new products, the Owl Whiteboard Camera, which is this weird thing that kind of recreates whatever you're drawing on a real whiteboard in digital space. I didn't quite understand
That's been a smart board thing for a long time. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Yeah. This one, maybe it's just not well implemented, but it was interesting in any case. And the other thing is this, which is very similar to Zoom Rooms, which is this Owl Labs meeting central thing that works with the Owl camera.
I mean, there's a whole thing of meet your customer where they are. So where they are right now is they're desperately trying to hang on to the past, and so people are going to make a bunch of products for them until then. But the next generation of companies and design will not be around, moving people around physically, because it's super inefficient. Next question
comes from Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois. As I'm preparing to upgrade to the MacBook Pro M1 Pro, my desk is set up with a Blackmagic Design eGPU. As it's not compatible with the M1, what does the panel recommend for a 1-cable connection to all the peripherals and the MacBook Pro M1 with charging?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, with charging, you're going to find OWC, macsales.com. Go there, they warranty their products and they test it, and you're going to do well with macsales.com.
And go ahead, David.
I've used 3 different ones: the CalDigit TS3, the Anchor docking station, and the OWC that was just mentioned. The only one I've ever had problems with is the Anchor docking station, but all 3 are pretty, and they're all just around the $300 mark.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, the OWC is the one they use. There is one other one made by Apple. It comes, you have 4 USB-C ports on the back, and it charges the laptop, but also comes with a 6K monitor attached. But that's the Apple-made one.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Everybody's covered what I was going to say. Let's move on.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Watch out that if you're getting a 16-inch MacBook Pro, that these ones won't be able to charge it fully, and the battery will slowly deplete, because it's a little bit, I know they're 99.9 watts inside the computer, but the watts on the new power supply from the 16-inch MacBook Pro are 140 watts. So watch it if you're getting a 16-inch one.
Yeah, and I'll second or third the OWC is a great way to handle that. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, up next here on the panel. Some job sites now have specific filters for remote and hybrid positions. LinkedIn is one example. With its massive data, could LinkedIn be one of the best sources of workforce and employer trend analysis? Could LinkedIn even steer such trends?
Yes, and they have for a long time. I mean, that's their big business model. It's just that they're the biggest game in town. They have more data about employers and employees than anyone else in the world. Like in no close second or third or fourth. I mean, they have an enormous amount of data that's what they sell. I mean, that we get to use LinkedIn for free, or you pay a little bit for some of the pro features. But the other side of LinkedIn for the employers and analysts is deep. Go ahead, Rupert.
I just think it's interesting also that LinkedIn themselves, as an employer, are really going for the remote hybrid approach.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, I think that they can see the trends better than everyone else. So that's why they would do it. I mean, I'm sure that they're seeing the number of people freshening up their LinkedIn and looking at what are those companies are, what companies are like, and so on and so forth. And I mean, the movement is towards hybrid, or not hybrid, but really remote work, and it's going to keep on moving that way. And we're just seeing the very beginning of it. We're seeing the kind of the little skirmishes that are happening at the moment, but in the next 10 years. A massive amount of the information workforce, not the whole workforce. There's lots of workforces that can't move somewhere else, but the folks that can are going to, because they can get so much more outside of the cities. We're just seeing cities, shift, not lose people, but shift the who's there pretty dramatically right now. Next question.
James Babbitt here in San Diego says the Facebook portal will bump up the resolution of Zoom meetings. Does Zoom now provide higher resolution to a pro user account upon request instead of requiring a user to buy a business license?
Go ahead, Rupert.
And when we're talking about the HD bump that either the portal provides or that HD available on the pro account, it's going to be at the 720 level at that level. So we're comparing 720 to 720 here, but the latest I hear is that you may get 720 on a pro account by special request if the things line up right, and that's possible. You may well get it at 720 on pro. The thing to bear in mind about the portal though is that the portal will enable you to bump other people's meetings to 720. So if you have to attend some other meeting that somebody else is hosting, you can bring your Zoom portal in, your Facebook portal, and bump that meeting. You cannot do that with a pro account. Pro account will only help you for the meetings that you yourself host.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you have to chase down a support ticket through Zoom and request the upgrade to 720. Can't go to 1080 on a pro account. But if you request it and you go through a little begging, you'll probably get there.
Next question.
Moving on, Douglas Carmichael says, what specific niche do you think the 14-inch MacBook Pro screen size fits in versus the 16?
Go ahead, Bill.
Anybody who just doesn't need that much screen real estate. And I know it's common for all of us to think I need the biggest screen I can find, but there are a ton of people who use their laptops in clamshell mode with a big screen monitor at their desk. So as long as the processor is equivalent and everything else is functioning correctly, and you're happy with an external keyboard and those kind of things, you're buying the processor, not necessarily the screen in those circumstances. Now, somebody who's doing content all day long, and I'm one of them, the larger screen real estate of bumping up to the 16, and particularly the better and better screens that we're seeing move into laptops, make those big ones a more rounded production machine. But my wife's used 13 and 14-inch computers for a long time now and does a lot of hard work, and they work every bit as well and as fast as the other ones.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Just in general terms, I mean, when I generally go for a smaller form factor rather than a bigger one is if the use case involves traveling, particularly flights, or even when I've commuted by train, a smaller laptop is quite helpful.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Rupert mainly covered the weight of the 14-inch as opposed to the 16-inch. It's quite substantially lighter than the 16-inch. So if you're doing a lot of traveling, you've got a smaller backpack than that size over the 16.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's in. Do iOS applications running on an M1 Mac provide crash reports when they crash?
Yes. Oh no, iOS. I don't know. I don't know if iOS do the same crash reports that you see with other things. I don't think we have an answer for that. All right, let's go to the next question. And I think we may time this well. Go ahead.
Douglas Carmichael is back again with, when a university marching band was performing in a televised parade, one of the activities was a look inside the control room. Could this have educational value even if they don't enter the field? Some described office hours as like a speakeasy.
Yeah, the showing behind the scenes is super valuable, and I'm always amazed. It's also just eye candy. We've done it a couple times where we show the behind the scenes for bigger shows, like at the beginning and the end or something like that, and it's just it's mesmerizing, and audiences love it, but everyone's too afraid of what people will say. So and the thing is that even when you're listening to the behind the scenes of a giant broadcast that millions of people are watching, what you see on the screen when you're watching the actual show, there's tons of things that went wrong. camera angles that didn't get hit, graphics that weren't ready, problems with some angle or whatever. And they don't really want you to see that. When you watch it, you have no idea. Like after you've listened to it a bunch, you're like, why are they in this camera angle? And you're like, oh, the other camera angle isn't working. That's why we're hanging on this close up, is because the other camera angle didn't happen, and so there's all kinds of those things that happen. It's an interesting puzzle. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to remind people there's some great videos out there on YouTube, particularly the ones with Hamish Hamilton doing the Super Bowl call. You get to see the whole thing behind the screen from the point of whoever's calling the shots. It is an amazing ballet, and people who do that well have such amazing skill sets. They're fabulous to watch.
Yeah. Next question.
Alex 40 Goldner in London here on the panel says, anyone here usually go to the HPA Tech Retreat in February each year? And are you planning to go in 2022?
I don't even know what the HPA Tech Retreat is. Can you tell us more, Alex?
It's essentially the tech folks of Hollywood kind of technology folks trying to work on the future plans of. So, for example, I think the year before last, Frame Hour did a thing where everyone worked together on a movie, a short film that they all made at the same time while coming up with future stuff associated with things like IMF and HLS. It's that level of media technology as used in the media in Hollywood and film and TV.
Yeah. Are you going?
I wasn't planning to, but I just suddenly got a message just now from the IMF. That's not the Impossible Mission Force, but the Interoperable Mastering Format User Group, and they said that they're meeting just after that. And
it's funny that they used IMF for that.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just reminded of the HPA event.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. A lot of moving parts right now. Next question.
Moving to Douglas Carmichael, I'm connecting with a Swiss therapist, and has a link there, who is working on horse therapy. In horse therapy, not on horse therapy. We've been brainstorming both remote sessions along with using Mukana to run talks and events about her rare and Ardennes horse. Could this have a market?
I think anything can have a market. Like literally the biggest power of a lot of these things. By the way, I raced quarter horses, among other things, race horses, and I got to say, a lot of them could have used therapy. They were crazy horses. Anyway, so anything that has thoroughbred blood in it is nuts. So anyway, but I think that the exciting thing here is that there is a market that's probably sustainable for like 95% of the things you can think of, if you can access that global market. So if you can access everybody at home that's interested in that thing, that's the thing that we're missing is that when we go, how do we get enough people to come to our thing in Pittsburgh or in Des Moines or whatever? There's not that many people that are interested in modular synths or interested in, something like that. You're going to have a hard time finding critical mass. As we figure out how to do virtual events on a global stage, we're able to reach that critical mass a lot more effectively. And right now we're still figuring out how to get out there and how to get the word out and how to attract people, but we're going to see that start to occur a lot more. And it's just a massive, massive opportunity to have almost anything that you can think of. If you're interested in it and you find 2 or 3 other people that are interested in it, there's probably enough to support it, to some degree. But you have to figure out how to get out of that box and how to get to other people that are interested in it. Go ahead, Rupert.
In the 90s, in the very early days of websites, one of the first ones I was involved in was a very specific dog breeder, very niche, and they knew that the market was just about to open up for them real big, and that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. So I think that it's, and again, we get back into when you decide you want to stop ignoring 99.99% of the addressable market, you'll stop doing physical events and start doing digital ones, because those are the ones that are, that's how you're going to address that market, and especially if you're in a niche. So it's something to pay attention to. Okay. So we're going to start a little early on our second hour. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot to talk about. So let's, I think we have, I moved one. Did you? Okay, there we go. We're now going to talk about 2.0. And we'll give you a little update before we jump into the questions of how things are going. You may have noticed a little bit of the color changing. If you're watching the behind the scenes, that's me trying to figure out the best HDR profiles to use inside of the system, and I'm still experimenting with that. So we started off in HLG, and then I changed a couple settings in HLG, and it just broke. So you got to see what the raw feed is going in. If you go back and look at it, you'll see this like what looks really, really washed out. That's what's actually being sent. That's the PQ curve being sent into YouTube, and for some reason it wasn't being read correctly, probably because I was changing things in the middle of the stream. And now you're seeing probably something that looks a lot more colorful, and that's HDR10. So you're seeing me make a bunch of adjustments to what we're doing, which is I find to be a fascinating thing is to kind of play with all of those colors. So that's from the color perspective, and from the stream perspective, I think we're still figuring that. I will say, Andy, I think that we were talking about frame rates last night, and I do think that the frame rates look better today than they did yesterday. We were noticing that in the behind the scenes feed, right now there's a white, is there supposed to be a white mark on that full screen? Is that me or is that you?
It might be me.
Okay.
I'll take a look at that.
Anyway, so we were dealing with this kind of lower, what I was noticing as lower frame rate in the test feed than what we were seeing in Zoom, and we think that we might have we updated some drivers, and we think we might have figured that out. But we're still kind of sorting through that process. Do you want to give any other updates, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's been a lot of work over the past week and a half now that we've been doing on 2.0. Some of the main things that we got down this week have been having guest people cut the show. So today our own Chris Fenwick has been cutting, and he's been doing a great job. And everybody's touched it, has given us really valuable feedback. There's a couple of things that we're doing right now that are important to the look and feel of the show that we need third parties to help us with. So Adam Tao has been great in getting us updates to Mix Effect to help resolve some crashes that we were having. Obviously, if Mix Effect goes down, considering how central it is to building the super sources and cutting on the constellation, we lose control without it. So Adam's been good at figuring out and advising me about best practices to avoid the possibility of a crash. So that's been really good. Universe Control has a bunch of bugs in the web controller. So they've been working on resolving things like why certain elements aren't appealing, why the scaling is off, those sort of things. So that's been really helpful for us. And I've been on the back end making engine improvements. I will say that I've been very, very pleased with how today's show has gone so far. Very pleased in the sense that the super sources have been working pretty reliably. Chris has generally been able to get to the inputs that he needed, and things have stabilized quite a bit. So there definitely is a long list of things that we still have to do and get to, but the things that we wanted to be working seem to be in a much better spot now than they were before. And I do agree that I think updating the deck link drivers has done two things for us. It's helped us with the frame consistency marching out into the hardware, and it's also helped us with the black flicker issue that we were having before. I haven't seen it as prevalently today as I had in previous days. So I'm optimistic that we're on the right path there. So all has been good. And you're muted, Alex.
Sorry. One of the things that we noticed is that that we were that it was flickering across the entire system. So it was, so it would not just flicker in one input. One input would flicker and they'd all flicker. And now Andy was talking about it flickering, and last night we were going back and forth, and then he said, "Oh, it's flickering across the whole thing," and I was like, "Oh, I know what that is." so I was like, I've seen that movie before. So Blackmagic hardware does not like frame rate changes. So we had a large event that we were working on one time that basically when they changed in the E2, they would keep on changing from 30 frames a second to 2997. Every time they made that change, it would ripple through all the Blackmagic hardware because there's less clock correction in the Blackmagic hardware than, like, for instance, an AJA hardware or whatever. And so, for instance, if we put an AJA FS against all of the inputs coming in, we probably would not have that issue that we're seeing there. And so because they have more correction in them. And so anyway, so that was just something. As soon as I saw that, and what I felt like and the drivers seem to have improved that, is that they weren't correcting properly on the way out. And so when it was dropping a frame, it was really dropping a frame, and it was causing more upset. So and I'm curious, before we jump into the questions, if you have questions, make sure to throw these in for Office Hours 2.0 from the folks who have done some of the editing. Who's edited with the Universe system? Stuart, Chris is doing it today. Did we have one other person that got?
We had John Barker doing it on Monday.
John Barker
He did an excellent job as well.
Yeah. How's the experience been so far for? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's super cool. What's really exciting about it is when Andy sent me the notes this morning, he said, no, this is like pre-alpha, whatever. And so I totally realized the user interface is going to change 100 times till Sunday. But what's exciting is to know that it's flexible and that it can change and it can be modified. And even while I've been sitting here cutting it, Andy and I are talking. I said, you know what button we need? He's like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. And so to know that we can add it is really exciting. I mean, there's some little things that obviously are going to get changed. And again, he's been saying, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. So I think that's the thing that's most interesting to me.
This whole pipeline is really, what's really cool about it is it's so flexible, and you're able to sit there and just go, oh, I want a new button here. I want to do it's the power of all these developers, Liminal as the core, but also with Mix Effect Pro and with even when we're talking about Isadora and other things, there's so much flexibility in what we can do. We're not just going, well, we're going to submit a ticket and then we're going to wait for the next 6 months to figure something out.
It could be a lot years. Of this is, I mean, I think about production switchers that I used to sit down at in the 60s.
Right.
They were made of steel. They had etched lines in them that were filled with paint. And so to change a button meant like changing, molecules.
Yeah.
This is super exciting at how flexible this is.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah. Andy did clue me into a few little things that he's planning, so I don't want to spoil it because some of it sounds really cool. But
the part where we're going to do it from space and weightless. I wasn't supposed to say that.
No. Okay, how about I think he mentioned something about putting people's faces on the buttons so you could tell who you're switching to, which is very cool. To do it right. Although I noticed Chris doesn't like the idea of that because I had to rearrange my.
Well, I don't have eyeballs in my fingertips. I don't understand why a face underneath on a button helps me.
I think it's just to be clear, we're going to put the names on the keys, not faces. The names.
Oh, okay. I thought it was an image. But there was also little things like how it resizes at the moment and the negative space that Andy has plans for and things like that. But this also kind of leads to a question that Guy's got in the list about what does one need to cut the show? And that is patience, a willingness to fail, and a monitor screen space specifically for this workspace. So you've not got everything else overlapping things and you can find it easy. I imagine Chris has got more screens than what I've got set up, so I had to find a little space. But the other thing is a willingness to try and to be risking failure because that's what we create something new with.
I was a little distracted looking at Stuart's in HDR, looking at Stuart's background. I really feel like you need to call Neil deGrasse Tyson and show it to him because there's like a whole like little clouds in the background and everything else, and it really pops out in the HDR play out. So it actually looks really good. So this is one of the things that as we go into 2.0 that I find fascinating is when I get it working, it's working now in Media Live. I mean, or to YouTube. I think that the HDR10 is working at the moment, and it's just seeing what looks different. So minor changes, when the white levels aren't quite right, it just annihilates the video. So one of the things that we're going to put in on our end this week or next week. We're going to make sure we have local scopes. You'll probably see another window here that pops up that's local. That's our local scopes. So there's the scopes the DVE store is doing, but there'll be a scope that's coming out of the FSHDR so that I can, and I'm probably going to be able to select it to different people so that I can just look at what's going on, because the scopes are great, but this is the overall view, and what we need to know is what's happening as we adjust them. And I thought that I needed a whole bunch of FS-HDRs to make this work, but I actually think we have a bunch of FS4s as well. And I think I can do some of the correction that's required to get it into the space that the FS-HDR does, but I'm a little concerned about losing sync, although we haven't really worked on that yet. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, one of the things that has been really striking with the higher quality, and I guess it makes sense even at a lower quality, is how different like just the luminance of the headshots are. Michael, Drosty, you're too bright. Ken, you're a little dark with your background. At one point I even sent Bill a message. I think you got it, Bill, because I said, hey, you're looking kind of dark, and he was able to pop it up. I think in addition to doing audio checks, we should have a scope up where we can just say,
it's coming.
You kind of need to be in this range here.
Yeah.
Along with the eye lines.
And there's ones that surprise me, like Alex Gollner. Alex Gollner his pops a lot, when we go to it. And in 709, when we look at this, I'm like, oh, it looks good. I mean, it looks good, but it doesn't pop out. In HDR, the windows and the background and everything else really light up, and so it's a really interesting behavior. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Is it possible we could develop LUTs for each of us?
Yeah.
Not your end, but on this end.
Yeah. Well, we could produce LUTs on our end too.
Oh, okay.
so it would be easier to do it on your end. I mean, you can produce LUTs if you have the cameras to handle LUTs, or you have something that can take in a LUT. So there's ways to do that now. You can get there's a couple of ways to do it with the little boxes. They're not cheap to do it. If you don't have it, it's cheap if you have a Blackmagic camera or something that will take a camera that will take a proper LUT. Otherwise, you have to spend some amount of money, anywhere from a couple $100s to $500 or $600 to have a box in between that you put the LUT in. I don't know of a lot of processing otherwise, but we are going to have to think about it, as we move forward. What I'm trying to do is not have you have to worry about it. What I'm trying to do is figure out how do we pipe these all into FSs and do color correction on every person, as they go through, which we do. As an aside, that's not that big of a deal for us because that's what we do in 090 already. So when you join a bunch of ours, we can adjust in 090's main system. We can adjust your sync, your audio, and all your color for every person that comes in. But we have isolated tracks, across each person. Sending all of that back over to 090 and then back is the problem. It's the thing that'll take a lot of cabling.
Maybe there's a best practice also for how we propagate our backgrounds.
Obviously, that's what we want to find. We want to try to, and we're going to learn it. So while Andy is figuring out the interaction, and while we have people editing, my job, the way I take it is, my job is to figure this part out. The color and the resolution and everything else. And so I'm pushing this HDR process and to try to figure out, looking at it every day, like what's working, what's not working, what's there. So as he triangulates how to make that work, smoothly, and as people are here doing it, I'm looking at, like, yours looks great, Mitchell, in HDR. It really jumps out. The other side could have a little bit more color. You have color on one side and not on the other. You could probably add a little bit of color there. That wash. But we already know that, like, Rupert sticks out and other people. I will admit the HDR part has had me rethink my whole background. Like, it's cute. You can see I turned up the color just to see what it would look like, and it definitely comes up. But I'm like, okay, now I need more detail because it really makes it look good as it goes. So I think it's going to put it. And I don't want to scare everyone off thinking they have to have that to make it work. But I think that John Preto has lots of different colors, for instance, that pop out, and so but it's a different way of thinking. No one's thought about this before. Like, broadcasters can't figure out how to connect someone from their home over Zoom at all with any level of quality, and we're sitting there trying to figure out how to do HDR over Zoom. So we're definitely pretty far out into the ether as far as figuring stuff out. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions, Bill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The first one comes from Guy Cochran, and Guy says, with a around $30,000 office hours 2.0 backend infrastructure price tag, what future business model do you foresee working that could recoup the initial investment?
I'm not worried. I'm not worried about recouping the investment. I'm worried about figuring out the recouping of it is to create a new kind of content that all of us can provide to other people. Now, at some point, like once we get office hours to a full nonprofit status, my goal is that we can all chip in to keep on building this system, and it'll probably become $100,000 system or a $50,000 system. It doesn't, we'll keep on making it better. And then we'll look for other people, companies that want to support us in the process as well. So we'll keep on trying to push that outer envelope. Again, what we want to do is get to a point where it's a stateful system that you can basically change. I don't think I use that term correctly, but a multi-tenancy system that allows you to. We could come out of office hours at 9 o'clock and someone else could be using it by 10 on something else, or 9:01. We could hit a switch and suddenly all that whole universe, set up and what's going in and everything else could be somebody else's show. That doesn't even have to do with office hours. It's someone who's already in the system. And so that's my goal is that we use that hardware system to keep on pushing it and making it available to our members and allowing them to do those things. And constantly showing people what it is. If people want to do it themselves, they could make that happen. I mean, I think that you could eventually build a rental. I will admit, I'm not thinking about this because I don't know if I want to be in that business. But you could think of if you had a system like this, you could think about renting it out. Like it's, X number of dollars per hour, $100 an hour, $200 an hour, or something like that to use it. If someone's doing a big event, that might make a lot of sense. And maybe it's, in the beginning though, that's probably quite some time away. And I think that the problem with that business model is this will end up in the cloud. Like, so the hardware that we're using right now is so that we can, the tools in the cloud to do it at the level that we're trying to do it at with the flexibility that we're trying to do it at, I don't think really exist in the cloud yet with HDR, with immersive audio, with all of those other things. I don't think that we're going to keep on experimenting with that and trying to push the outer edge. Like one of the things that I want to start experimenting with maybe next week, but the week after definitely, is using Unity Connect, where we take all of the audio from everybody's, I'm trying to figure out how to get ISO audio to and from the speakers. And so I'm thinking of just bypassing Zoom's audio altogether so that everyone here is using Unity, because we have a technical crew that can do that. Now, do I think that Zoom will eventually give us ISO audio? Yes. I do, but someday, 2023 or 2022 or something like that, we'll get some isolated audio that we can actually use. But in the meantime, let's figure out how to make the most of it. How do we resync people? How do we do all the other bits and pieces that we want to? And so I think that we can be experimenting with the hardware to figure that out, so that we can then apply it as the other technologies catch up with what we're doing. And I think that that's going to be the key to the operation. And so we're experimenting hardware. I do think, again, we'll end up in 2023, we will be doing HDR, immersive audio, super high quality 4K in the cloud. Like that, with, it'll be 4K for all the participants, all the panelists and everything else. Sometime in 2023, we'll hit that. But I don't want to wait until 2023 to start working on it. So that's why I just want to make sure when people say, why is he doing it in hardware? Is because I'm trying to push an outer edge that doesn't exist in the web. And I don't want to be limited by what we can do right now on the web. So anyway, next question.
Guy Cochran's up from Seattle again. He says, what does one need to cut the show in Office Hours 2.0?
It's very complicated. Go ahead, Andy.
All right, so here's what you should see as the operator. You get this little panel of buttons here, and it's not exactly what Chris sees, because what Chris sees is actually this, which is a slightly reduced set of commands and buttons. Now, that's the bug I was talking about with Universe, where not all the elements show. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, but this is what you would get from the web browser, but this is eventually what he will see, and I'll be able to rearrange these buttons a little bit to make it more intuitive. But basically all you need to cut the show is a web browser. If you can get into a web browser, you can get on the internet, and you can be in the Zoom call where you can see the multi-views that are passed back from the Zoom room. You have everything you need. So in this interface, you have the ability to select any of the 20 panelists and cut to them. It's a preview program paradigm. So you can select any of them, but honestly, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong here, but he probably spends a lot less of his time at this bottom area and a lot more of his time up here. These are where you select between the smart gallery, the smart super source, the host, the active speaker, the question reader, and the screen share. And these are the inputs that are automatically being calculated and served up to you. So you never have to think about what the right super source is or how to assign your boxes for the super source. You just cut to it, you go, and you're good. Same with the gallery view. Eventually, it'll always be a relevant group of people, that are relevant to the conversation. You don't have to think about how to assign them or get them there. You just know it's there. Active speaker is really special because it's cut within the hardware. So rather than having Zoom just sort of roll over its active speaker view, which we don't have control of, and it looks kind of bad at the transition, this is cut in hardware using Zoom OSC reporting on the active speaker state and cutting it in the hardware, which is pretty exciting. In the top area, you have the ability to assign individuals to inputs. And you also have the ability to assign those inputs to positions in the super sources. So for example, at top of day, I put Alex in super source 1.1 and Bill in super source 1.2. And that means that when we run the unfurl super source command, let me cut over to that real quick for the 2.0 people. So now you can see I've got Alex and Bill on the left, and then I can cut down to just Alex by himself. So that's pretty fun to be able to control what goes on in there. So lots of different dashes. Then on the right-hand side, you have status reporting, the ability to join office hours or after hours, and we can expand this to support all different types of meetings, as Alex was saying, like being able to quickly bring this system into any other meeting or webinar. It's actually trivially easy because all the bots come in together. So
and Andy, can you do that again? So, I mean, we've been focusing on the YouTube side. We've been focusing on just the interface. Could you do that again? And I'll try to bring up the O2 window.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trivial little thing here, but I just have the ability to fold and unfold individuals on the left-hand side with these buttons here. So if I do, that's the wrong one. You want to do 2.0 space 1 is the super source that you want to look at. Anyway, it's just showing the ability to be able to adjust these super sources from the interface. Anyhow, all of this is controllable by Chris remotely.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, what I'm actually doing, and I'll try and show you what I want to show you. This might be a problem. So what I'm doing is I just open up my Zoom second display, and this could be a huge feedback thing here. Actually, I'm not going to do this for multiple reasons. What I do is I open up the Zoom second display, put it at the top of my window, and then below it, I put the web interface that Andy has sent me. And it allows me to see both at the same time. One of the things, and Andy, we can talk about this later, and I don't know how this gets made, but it automatically has an artistic amount of space above it. And if I could minimize that window as tight around it as possible, I could put it right below my display easier without having a bunch of dead pixels around it.
This is one of the things that we need Universe to help us with. So the three things that we've asked them for are the ability to bring in keyboard shortcuts so that you could attach a Stream Deck and cut it from buttons, which they're working on. The ability to fix screen scaling so that I can actually design all the different responsive UI elements that I want and push them to you so that you can have exactly that. And then the ability to have every button and text entry and status dashboard that appears in the native view to appear in the web view. And there's a couple of them that are missing right now. So if they can do those three things for us, we'll be able to do all of that for you.
Next question.
Next question comes from Greg Gibson. And Greg, if I can get my mouse to the right place, asks him from Washington, D.C., given the previous mentioned $30,000 price tag for Office Hours 2.0, could this same format be replicated for substantially less money using NDI sources?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of things there. First of all, I think the $30,000 price tag is astronomically less than what it would take to do an equivalent thing inside of individual hardware, right? Where, for example, what 090 might do. I'm sure that room costs a lot more money. Granted, it has different capabilities, so it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison, but we're already in good territory. But to Greg's point, I do absolutely agree that you could do a lot of this inside with NDI, and it would be a different type of project, right? Like this project focuses a lot on HDR and immersive, but if those weren't important to you, and we could talk about whether that's a good or a bad thing to have that as a priority, absolutely, right? You cut out a lot of the hardware and converters and things like that. You don't necessarily need the same routers and hubs and things like that. You go and even for the point of designing, it's a lot easier to design in native software switchers than it is to do it in hardware, even with Mix Effect, which opens up a lot of those workflows to the hardware. There's something special about being able to go in vMix and lay out all of your different sources and just know that when you call them, it'll do it if it doesn't crash, right? So there's that element of it all. But yes, I think you can definitely bring the price down if you adjust the scope of work to not include HDR and immersive.
Yeah, and that was a specific need that I have. so I think that it's an important piece of what we're trying to do, and for me. But I flat out will say that it would be less expensive to do it over software, and that would be easier. It's just that I'm trying to push a much harder outer envelope of stuff that I think is possible, and so I'm trying to combine all of the stuff. Great conversation with incredible audio, incredible video, and trying to piece all those things together. And getting Zoom feeds up to HDR is not that big of a deal. But imagine if we were playing out true HDR immersive video as examples while we're talking. That stuff will just explode, out of the screen in a way that we haven't seen anybody else do in the past. And especially if we were doing training in HDR or immersive audio, it'd be really useful if you had a device that could hear it, that you could actually hear what we were training you in, rather than saying, well, if we had immersive, you'd hear it right now going around to the backside of your head. And so my interest in training around HDR and immersive is part of the drive to be able to make that happen. So that's why we're requiring those bits and pieces right now. But I think it'd be also really inexpensive to do it in the cloud. You could probably do the whole thing in the cloud. And I'm hoping that I'm leaving that up to you guys. So to you guys figure out how to take what we're doing and make it work in the cloud. Next question
comes from Alex 40 in London, and Alex says after hours, but before office hours, what will be the on-screen branding, automated information on the screen in the hour before the Q&A hour of the office hours 2.0?
I haven't figured that out, to be honest. I have some ideas. I mean, there'll definitely be a point where it shifts to. I actually think that we may leave a lot of this stuff that we've done in the past in. I think that it's interesting for people to see the mic checks and so on and so forth. But I do think that there'll be some point where it shifts down. I think there may be multiple feeds. I think that we may take on a situation where there's multiple ways to watch the show. And what I mean by that is that you may watch it in Zoom, where you're listening to the comms and you're watching all the bits and pieces, all the moving parts happening. You may be watching it on YouTube, where there's a raw feed that is the unlisted feed, that like what we're doing now, that is just kind of there, and you get to see the whole conversation and everything else. And so for the people in the know, you could go and jump on office hours and listen to it from 6 a.m. on, and it just goes into it. But we don't tell anyone it's there. Like, you have to kind of be here to know that it's there. Well, now everybody knows I'm watching this thing anyway, but you'd have to know where to find it. And then there'll be the public feed, and that public feed will most likely have a countdown clock, and a thing. And now what I'd love to do is get to a point where there's like before we go live, all the things I say at the very beginning, reminds people of those things and tells people what's coming up, and it's all pre-recorded, and it all happens in the 5 minutes before the show, so you see that this is what's coming up, and we've got this and this and this, and there's like a middle of video and maybe a little interview with the people that we're going to be in the second hour, and there's so there could be like 5 or 10 minutes of pre-show that we put together for every morning that is just talking about what those things are. And it'd be something like the week before I record them, or somebody else records them, or someone else, a variety of different things happen. So there's 5 or 10 minutes before the show that has a countdown clock, but also has content. And then we hit the top of the hour, and I just go, "Hi, everybody, let's jump into the questions." And I don't have to say it. I've said this thing almost 600 times. I'm good. I'm ready to hand it off. So anyway, but we can have all kinds of things, like how to join the Discord server and how to do this thing and how to do, like we put all the stuff back in, because we're going to kind of expand that a little bit and make it a little easier to find. We won't post how to do the Discord. We'll just tell you when you need to be where. We'll still make it hard, but not as hard. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I'm working on the graphics and the animations and the branding that goes along with that. It's organically growing. There is no real game plan, because we're breaking new ground here. So, like I think, Alex, you just covered quite a few different ways to be able to do that. But there'll be familiar things, I think, that you're used to seeing in broadcast, but done differently. That's our intention, to improve upon what's already out there and say, hey, I've always wanted to do this. Let's do it.
And it'll constantly be changing. I mean, this is a lab. This show is going to become, every day or every week, it's going to be a lab on how to do the next generation of content. And I do think that we have the opportunity. I know it sounds bold, but I do think we have the opportunity to really affect the next generation of how people think of shows, of these collaborative conversations, but turning up all these quality knobs, way up. And again, that's part of the HDR immersive thing too, is, oh, by the way, in addition to having 15 to 20 people in a conversation, it's also at a higher bit rate than almost any talk show is, and it's also at a higher resolution. It's also got better audio. So we're basically trying to, beat broadcast at every level. Next question.
Jim Hankins, Chesterfield, Michigan, here in the panel says, what tasks are being performed by MixFX currently for ATEM control? Preview program and SuperSource box input sources? Others?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so the mix effect is playing a really critical role, and what's cool about it is the way that it basically absorbed all of the things that ATEM OSC had, so that now we can do everything from, like you suggested, boxes and selecting the super sources, but also being able to cut on all the MEs. So in addition to box routing and super source selection, MixEffect is also responsible for the transitions, so cut and auto. It's also responsible for cutting on ME2 for active speaker, and ME2 loops back into ME1, and that's how it becomes a source that's available there. It also has a couple of other status feedback things that, or status inputs that we're able to do to it. And I know that Adam's working on having feedback coming out of it as well in the future for reporting. So right now it really is sort of everything that we would want. Whenever I want to touch the constellation, I go through MixEffect to get to it. I don't have any I think the only thing right now that I would use the TCP IP protocol for is to use the video hub protocol inside the constellation to get into the MV16. But that's it. Everything else is MixEffect. So it's really playing a foundational role in the way that we interact with the constellation.
Next question.
Felipe Baez, a friend in Prague, Czechia, asks, wouldn't it make sense to send log video to Zoom to make HDR transforms instead of sending Rec 709?
It would if we were at 10-bit. So we've made requests of other video conferencing, and we've mentioned it to Zoom as well, that we need 10-bit. If we're doing log, the problem is you're throwing away a lot of the log curve is basically without 10-bit or 12-bit to support it, is losing a lot of color data. And so it will actually, transforming from a linear 709 signal to HDR is actually will have less banding than transforming an 8-bit log image will actually band faster. Because the colors along a gradient are actually closer together in that log, but we're throwing away the data. So there's not enough description. For those of you listening, I'm sure Felipe knows this, but the 8-bit is 256 levels of gray in the red, green, and blue each. 10-bit is 1024. So there's 4 times as many gray levels to describe colors that are close together. 12-bit then takes you into 4096. And so those give you a lot more now. I'm not worried about 12-bit right now. 10-bit will get us most of the way that we need there. There are some places where 12-bit makes a difference, but we don't need to worry about that right now. We're talking about web video. So but the 10-bit is really important to do log input. And the long-term goal for us is to have 10-bit support on Zoom or some other, whatever we end up using down the road, so that we can do exactly what you're saying, which is get everybody eventually to go to log. And then we can push the envelope a lot further. Next question.
Tlaluk Miguel Lopez Waterman, our friend from the show often, says, I just scrubbed through the entire show up until now and did not see any super sources used in today's show. Is that dealer's choice?
Go ahead, Andy.
So the reality actually is that we use the super sources pretty frequently. However, we're never on them for long enough for it to appear in the scrubbing bar. So this is a good request from Alex, actually, was to use them more as sort of glue between the different looks that we want to be in versus sitting in them for a long time. So Chris has been going to the super sources pretty frequently today, but you're not going to notice them as you scrub because the samples that you're seeing, it's very unlikely that it landed on a sample that was the super source. But if you play it back, you should see them.
Yeah, it puts a lot of more pressure on me. So what happens is, as a host, I'm clicking on a bunch of different things. I'm going over here, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. Having my screen up all the time was, and even now you still see me take sips of tea or whatever while we're doing it. And so it was, as I looked at some of the early ones, it was problematic. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Andy and I were talking about that. We have a solution for that in the same way that we can bring Bill in and out. what we want to do is be able to take you out and just have like the 4 up. We just have to get the SuperSource people to write that.
The only thing that we have to think about is that what happened? Do we bring me back in every time I say go to the next person, go to the next person, go to the next person? Well, I as you were talking, I was thinking about what if when I say that there's no me throwing it to the next person. It's just you get a cue. You know, like everyone knows that go.
Well,
go
cue
Chris,
you
go
might
Bill.
get is Zoom will tell that to you when we automatically unmute you. Say host unmuted you right up in front of your screen.
Right. So you could just, but that might be a little too slow. Like we want to have it nearly overlap, but I think that we could get to a point where it queued very quickly, into that system. Anyway, something to think about.
Also, Alex, I'm curious, what is your preferred look while, like you say, so Bill, let's go to the next question. Do you just want to see Bill? Quite often I just leave it on the wide shot, the 16. Should it be you and Bill as a 2-shot?
I think a 2-shot with Bill and I would be actually a really interesting one for that. I also think that we need to one of the things we're talking about, we haven't gotten to yet with SPX, is being able to have that question come up as text.
Right.
So it might, as he's reading it, it pops up as something you can read along with him, and then it zooms down to the corner and has a bunch of other things happen. So that's another thing that we have to kind of play with.
So if it's a 2-up with you and Bill, there's plenty of room at the bottom for the question. And by the way, Talalek, I am very conscientious of leaving this SuperSource up for you so you can see it.
I think that, and in this case, for instance, for that SuperSource specifically, I would typically, with only one person, make that screen a lot bigger. I would not leave that much data around it. The other reason not to sit on the SuperSources for very long is that it's not one thing that we learned with some of the other stuff that we've done is it's not a great experience for the mobile viewer. So if you think that, 60, 70, 80% of your viewers are going to be on mobile, which is oftentimes, as we grow, that's going to be a big deal. It's a super uncomfortable way to watch it. We got a lot of feedback in WWDC when we did it in the what we would call office hours 1.5. So of us jumping from one to the next. A lot of feedback of 60% of our viewers were on mobile, and they really gave us a lot of feedback
60?
over
Wow.
what we're watching it, because it was a much wider audience. So we're putting those things out and they popped up, and it really drove people crazy, to be sitting on an 8-up while someone's talking. They really wanted us to go back to full screens. And so we have to think about going back, which is funny because I think that's also why the format that Chris sent out, the graphic for us to place it turns out to be a really comfortable thing. When you're too close, it's really weird on your phone, and when you're too far away, you're really small on the phone. And I think that framing is actually just right. It's what was it? The porridge is just right.
The other issue about being too close, and I noticed this several months ago when I was at home on a weekend and I was watching you on the TV, on the 65-inch TV.
It's a little disconcerting.
Alex's head was gigantic.
It's funny. It was that comment that you made that had me pull back a little bit. So I made my head smaller.
I think I took a photo and sent it to you.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, I got to back up a little bit. And I was doing it mostly to protect my background, and so I had to readjust a whole bunch of things. The reason I was so close is because I was zooming in so that I could get the edges, and there was a whole thing. But it took a little bit of rearranging. I also noticed that I was getting cut off in my lower thirds on Twit, so that was the other reason to do it. So there's a bunch of technical reasons as well. Next question.
Moving on, John Preto is up next. He says, I noticed the Rockin' Rabbi's graphics layout on his screen share, and I started crying. Laugh out loud. Should we use a standardized look and feel for when the panelists to a screen share for Office, for when the panelists do a screen share, maybe for Office Hours 2.0? Yeah, I think it's
What's
David
the thought
Paskin,
process
he's
there,
not here.
John?
So when we do screen shares individually, we all have different look and feels, right?
Right.
And so I'm just thinking, should we have one template that we all use to do our screen shares?
I do think we do. I mean, I think that's where we'll want to. In general, we want to find. I think that one's perfect. There you go, John. I think we just use that the whole time.
The torn porthole look.
We just need them turning a little bit. A little bit of turning here would be great. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, all right. So I think we can figure out what that might look like. Go ahead, Rupert.
I wanted to kind of add to this is, are we going to see differences in behavior or even workflow and on the back end if people are screen sharing in Zoom or piping it in through their switcher down their video feed?
Yeah, we're going to have to kind of figure that out. I think we've already started building a tool. I mean, the ability to take the screen shares them directly. Go ahead, Andy.
Yep, we have that. So if somebody were to start a screen share, we can grab it.
I think it's actually
Constellation.
I think it's actually easier for us to grab it from a screen share than it is for someone to edit in now, because the problem is when they cut it into if they use their ATEM to cut it in or whatever they're using, it cuts it into their screen suddenly, and we didn't expect it. We'll be in a super source, and suddenly it appears in the super source, whereas if you do a screen share, it comes in as a separate feed into our computer. So on our end, I think it's actually, I mean, you can correct me, Andy, but I think it's actually easier for people to use screen share now from our perspective than it is to use the edit.
I mean, the only thing I'll say about that is that screen share is utter chaos for the whole of
right,
Zoom.
the rest of
it. The moment you turn, so in that particular situation, where we're in a super source, yes, it's easier, but honestly, I think the better solution would just be to announce if you're going to, cut into yourself, hey, and now I'm going to show you this thing. And now we go into it versus it sort of sneaking on us, because we have everybody individually at HD, so we can still get that look and it will be fine. It's just, I worry about the sort of the nuclear bomb of screen share across the entire platform when you do that.
It's such a disastrous feature. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say that there is what Andy just said. And also, because the switcher is doing a lot of things automatically, and Andy, this is kind of goes to the note that I sent you, it would be neat, it would be nice if there was a button you could hit, maybe your tab key or something like that, where it would hold the automatic switching from doing anything, because I'm about to cut to something and I don't want something to disappear too quickly. You get a lot of flash edits because I'm cutting to a person, but then the automatic switching does something. And I don't know if that's something that could be worked into it, but I know that when I used to do big shows, I didn't want anybody like switching something other than me. Like if I go to a wide shot, I don't want somebody else switching the IMAG screen because I don't want it to cut a split second after I get to it. So I'd always force everything into the truck, and I'd say, no, the screens are getting cut by me in the truck. Boom. Right. This is 30 years ago.
I'm finding that exact same thing when people have multiple cameras in their kitchens. They're switching and cutting while I'm trying to switch and cut. And Nate Hill, caught me. I caught Nate Hill out a couple times on that. So that's an interesting feature.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Speaking for the graphics team, we like the idea of the templates, but not the one John Preto had up, because it looks like they opened a Gilligan's Island.
And what's wrong with that?
Next question.
Moving on to Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Could Office Hours 2.0's pipeline be a great way to produce a show to pipe into a Zoom event?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely want to go down that path of being able to pipe those things in. One of the things that we can do with enough in the cloud, for instance, is pipe it into a whole bunch of different meeting rooms. So this is a program that we didn't actually end up doing, but when we designed it, we knew that eventually we'll get to do this, which was the idea that we had 15,000 people coming into an event. And the idea was they would all be in Zoom breakout rooms or Zoom rooms themselves that were grouped for some reason, regionally, grouped by interest, grouped by a bunch of things. So there might be 300 or 400 people in each one of these rooms. Between presentations, they're all talking amongst themselves. They could even go into breakout rooms. There's a whole bunch of things they could do, but we could broadcast to all of them at the same time. So we'd have one user agent that's in all of these things, and it's playing out the video, so they can all watch it together. But then, and that's a unified experience. And so the idea is the panelists are not really in the Zoom with them. They're in another room that we do this with. And then you have a much more designed experience for them that you can't get, in the native application right now. And a much more feel like a broadcast for all of them. But then they still have that localized experience between those things where they can talk and amongst themselves. So those are, I think those are some of the, there's definitely reasons for, and we've done a ton of this. What 090 has done a ton of is piping these back into like webinar is something we do all the time. So that all the panelists come in, we have a whole show with their stuff, and we pipe that video, that finished video back into webinar, so that it's a much better experience than going from speaker to speaker inside of the native tools. Next question.
Tony Mobley, Newton, Georgia. Up next, how does an iPhone camera and Filmic Pro look today in Office Hours 2.0?
Looks good. Let's cut to Tony, and we can take a look at it. The color is, today I've been switching a bunch of things around, and so I'm not sure which parts are working and which not. Like mine looks a little desaturated right now, and I'm not sure exactly why. I'm just waiting for it to cut Tony here. So you'll see me next to Tony.
I'm looking for Tony's direct feed. Tony, can you just say something?
It's 16. He's 16.
Greetings.
Nope, 16 is black.
iPhone.
He's supposed to be 16. So
yeah.
So go ahead and talk, Tony.
Greetings. Tony Mobley here, using the 10s Max with Filmic Pro, and that's what I'm using today.
I'm just waiting for now. Now I have to wait 20 seconds. This is the part of the thing is as we start to figure all this stuff out, is that you do it and then you look at YouTube and then you try to figure out what, when is it going to actually show up. There I got the black frame. We can all look at it here, and it'll be, I'm sure, in just a second. I'll see Tony, but I think that I'm going to guess that Tony looks really good on it. Yeah, the colors are a little flattened out, but I think it's my correction right now in it. So I think it will actually look really good when I fix whatever I broke earlier this morning.
On the 2.0, I pinned Tony, and then I also pinned the 2.01, and so there was comparisons of Tony.
Yeah, but they'll look completely different here because you're looking at a 709. You're looking at a 709, so Tony will look a lot darker here than he will, and the 2.0 will look darker because the 709 is all washed out.
It does look washed out.
Yeah,
but he looks very crisp in his original source.
His iPhone shot looks really nice resolution to me, but the depth of field is complete. I can read the signs and stuff like that behind Tony's shoulder, which means that I'm getting distracted by the background a bit.
Yeah, but I think that I'd be interested to see what an iPhone 13 looked like. I gotta look at that as a live feed into it. But yeah, so we'll have to take a look at that, because it theoretically would have the cinematic look. Could be kind of interesting. Although I have found that the live version of that isn't as good as the recorded version.
I can adjust the frame rate also.
Yeah, no, I think that we're still too early on to say this looks good and this looks bad, because right now, for instance, I broke something while I was making these adjustments, and now I can't figure out why. All the colors look better earlier today than they do now. So so we're still trying to figure out exactly how to dance with how there's a bunch of pipelines, the FS and the Media Live and YouTube, and they're all doing different things, and so we're still trying to figure out what part of that makes it work and not work. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, comes up next, and Rupert asks, what is the final latency between the live and the viewer? Could the offset be a problem with chat activity in Mukana not lining up with the timestamps of the question?
It's about 20 seconds. The latency on the questions is much higher than that. So the latency on this question was about 40 minutes.
Did I do that?
Sorry, did you? What were you?
Sorry,
Chris?
my bad.
Yeah. Okay. So the latency on the questions is very high, much higher than the latency on the video. I think that eventually the vast majority of folks, and will probably not want people to interact like watching in Zoom. Eventually, we'll want them to watch the stream. It's a matter of syncing people up related to it. And you are correct that the timestamps on the questions may be off. I think that what we'll end up doing is taking all those timestamps and building something that just makes a correction, for it as it goes to YouTube. And that's only a short-term issue, because YouTube is going to be this is part of the process, but eventually, we'll probably have a more refined way of managing that. But yeah, I think that we'll end up with, we've done it in the past. In a previous version of Mukana, you could go into the control panel and just type in the YouTube offset, and then it would just move all the question all the ties by that many seconds, and it was just a lot, so it was a relatively easy thing to do. So I think we'll get there. Next question.
Dennis Champion Walker here from the UK in office hours today asks, it looks like actually has a comment. It looks like the video quality on the office hours 2.0 stream dropped at some point during today's stream. Even with 4K selected, it looks like 720p. Earlier in the show, it was higher quality. Any comments?
I have noticed that, and I don't have an answer. Go ahead, Andy.
I got a couple of things there. So one is that it's going to look worse than 1080 at all times, because right now it's a 1080 capture, going out to 4K in the Constellation, going down through the Terran X to 1080, going through the FSHDR, and then going back up to 4K to get out through the Elemental. So it's constantly yo-yoing the resolution because we just don't have the run we need right now to get 4K between A and B. Now the delta in resolution over time is something that we can look at as well, and that sometimes has to do with how the Zoom server is communicating video through to us, especially like if we do a screen share for a second and come back for it, it might actually take a couple minutes for it to jump back up to the full resolution. And I also would say that the perception of sharpness and color does play in with color profile as well. So if we're shifting profiles around, you might actually perceive it to be sharper or less sharp if there's other things with the shadows and things like that they're playing through it. So the point is we're turning it like a million knobs at once and scaling up and down all over the place, and we just need to clean that entire thing through before we can look at the culprit for resolution.
I will say that I've noticed that the going to something that isn't one of the ISOs, the screen shares, the other any feed that isn't part of that, just destroys the resolution. Like everybody is soft after, like it just, as soon as we go to that, we come back and there's like now. So now everybody will be soft, or if it goes into that screen, it'll, anytime we go to something that isn't part of the ISO requests, it is definitely devastating the resolution.
I think what that is it's the fact that we're pushing a spotlight through, and Zoom is saying, okay, that's the most important thing in the world right now. Give it the resolution. And then, that thing that's requesting all those 1080s, drop those down to 360 or drop those down to whatever.
Does that mean that the spotlight itself, when spotlights hit it, it's dropping everybody? So when Sky hits spotlight, it's actually impacting everybody's video quality.
Well, I know it definitely does it for a screen share. Spotlight could be part of that as well. Yeah. The Zoom whole backend doesn't have yet. This is part of why we want, you guys talk about wanting raw audio. I want raw data because I want to be able to explicitly say to the Zoom server, I want this video at this resolution. Right now, I can sort of make a box and tell Zoom to put a video in it and hope that it gives me what I asked for. But we're not quite at the point where we have full control of what Zoom sends us. And there's all these rules with spotlighting and screen sharing and how many people are online that affect the way that Zoom distributes resolution to clients.
Yeah.
I could tell you this, when Sky spotlights, it takes over the active speaker view on 2.0 and it wreaks havoc.
Yeah. So we're just noticing, this is what we're learning as we do it. So we're trying to figure all these bits and pieces out. Next question.
Josh Kaufman coming in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What HDR displays or devices are compatible with the formats Office Hours 2.0 may use?
Right now, pretty much all of them. Anything that says HDR on it will be at some level compatible. iPhones and iPads and the most recent Macs, as well as any monitor out there that can handle it, as long as it can see HDR. We're just using HDR10 and HLG, so those are we're not using Vision yet. So just about everything that's out there is compatible when it works. Again, something happened. I don't know what caused it, but something is off now in what we're doing. So again, this is part of what I'm trying to kind of meet Andy in the middle, where it's going to take him a couple weeks to kind of get this all like sussed out, and my goal is to suss out the back end. And you may see us, some of these ISOs jumping into after hours. It'll all be private or unlisted streams, but we're going to keep on trying to figure out what's going on with some of the bits and pieces. The next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, I noticed that the Universe interface is put behind a login password pair. How is Cloudflare for Teams set up, and how do you connect it to the back-end infrastructure?
Go ahead, Andy.
This is a good question for Jonas if you see him, but basically the way that it works is it tunnels the web controller from Universe to the public internet, but it puts it through the Cloudflare team level access. So Jonas has a list of approved email addresses and things like that that are, or he will, that are available for us to and send a 6-digit code to that you can then go in to get into the interface, and then it will redirect you to the controller. So it's important to have a security layer in front of all of that. I'm going to be making some changes. I rotate the URL every day. So you might still get the login screen, but you won't actually get redirected to the controller. So things like that. We try to keep this from going into anybody.
Yeah. Next question.
David Brady in New York up next on the Zoom test kitchen. It was demonstrated that screen share pipelines can be up-res content where video pipeline can degrade the signal. This can be advantageous for text-dense content. Thoughts on this?
Go ahead, Rupert.
This kind of thing does introduce some variables. If you are in a 1080p meeting anyway, and you've got a good signal from your contributors, and if they are piping in video via their video feed at 1080p 30, providing they're sharing a 1080p screen, I think the difference there is negligible. It may see a little less compression on the screen share, but if you've got a stable signal either way, there shouldn't be a great deal of difference. But the variation can come there if they're sharing something bigger than a 1080p screen. If they've got a native 4K display and they're trying to push you 4K, you're going to get that resolution unless you start tweaking the optimize for video settings, and then you get into these variations where we may start seeing differences in behavior, even if we do standardize on using screen share.
Next question.
Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners, New York says, what comms system are you using for Office Hours 2.0 remote control? Can Unity be tied in with a ClearComm system on site somewhere?
We are using, we're not, I don't think we're using anything right now unless Chris and Andy are jumping on Unity right now, but we're planning to use Unity for the whole thing. And we may eventually incorporate ClearComm, but right now we don't. We're just doing Unity. And the boxes with a small number of people on site, we tend to use the Studio Technologies Dante system as opposed to, so if there's under about 6 belt packs that we need, we tend to use just Dante. When we go over that, then we tend to start thinking about whether we need ClearComm to tie that in. Using Unity on phones and on site is not something we do very often. Next question.
Josh Kaufman's back from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with another question. Could the Panelist interface include a request for full screen, possibly suggesting supersource layouts that do not cut out portions of the share screen, or auto-expanding the Panelist at the time they start to speak?
I think anything's possible. So I think that it's one thing that we just have to be careful of is too many moving parts. So Panelists asking for things that now, I think that'll be a dance that we're just going to keep playing with. I do think that there's some value to what you're saying is like, oh, I'm going to want full screen to do something. But I think that could create a bunch of other, we're doing it live. So that's the other thing, is that it's coming really fast. So there's certain things you can and can't do. Speaking of live, Bill, are the questions expanding for you when you hit answer, or are they still? No, they're still not. Okay. All right.
No, it looks exactly like it was before I took my break.
Okay, great. All right, great. All right, next question.
Courtney Gooden in Hollywood, California says, how do you prevent black squares from showing up in the Office Hours 2.0 gallery view when the panelists have to drop out during the show?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. We're probably going to ask that instead of going to black, that you turn your video off in Zoom once we start the show. That way Zoom OSC will get a notification that your video turned off. If you just put it in black, there's none of the APIs or none of the system knows that. So we get a programmatic response when that happens. Now, I still haven't built out the logic for the smart gallery yet. The smart gallery, I hate that Zoom is now using that term for a thing that's totally different than what I had it for. I had it first, but the term, basically what I want is the ability to put the most recent speakers and sort of push them up and to the left, so that if we go to a 9 up, it's fine. If we go to a 16 up and there's 16 people, it's fine. But I can detect how many people have video on, tell the MV16 whether it needs to really be an MV9 or whatever to get to and from those sources, and always push in the most relevant content into those spaces. But it's just something I haven't had time for yet.
Go ahead, Alex.
I kind of like the idea of a speed button you press. Okay, sample this loop, and you hold the button down as a contributor, and you. And then that is actually a piece of video that is then captured and can be played on a loop if you decide to go off
So
somewhere.
the problem that we had with that is that we've had people put up some kind of loop that's there. And number one is you see the jump, right? It doesn't loop perfectly, so they're if it's not long enough. And the second thing is I call on them, like I threw the ball to and so then I call on them and they're not there, it's just like you're like, oh, go ahead, Chris.
What's even worse than that, John Preto created a loop once while he was raising his hand to answer a question.
I didn't want to call John out,
and it was in his loop.
It was in his loop, so I said, John.
He was in the other room, and you go, Preto. He's like,
and this is a long-term thing. I don't want to scare people off, but sometime next year, it's going to be really a show. Like we're pretty informal right now, but there'll be some point next year where it's really a show and you need to be there the whole show. Like you can't like wander off, like that's that we're not worried about that right now, but there'll be some point where there's enough strong demand, for people wanting to be in it, that we just want it to be a tight show without it being quite as informal as it is now. But again, late 2022, 2023, that kind of thing. So I don't want to build a system around it as much just because I want to get rid of it in general over time, So anyway, next question.
Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany is up next. Why are some speakers out of sync today and some are perfectly in sync?
Welcome to Zoom, Andy.
We haven't set up a sync pipeline yet. There's really been no consideration for how the audio is moving through the system. Ultimately, what we want to do is be able to put in an X32 or something like that, some sort of mixer that is got a robust remote control API that we can then tie into all the other logic that we're doing. So be able to have an interface that's for a volunteer every day to be able to dial in all the syncs for all the participants. Now, of course, we're going to need isolated audio for that to work. And things like that. So ISO audio, yes. But we need to build the infrastructure for it.
There's a painful thing that we're going to have to do, probably not this weekend, but next weekend. But I realized that the only way for us to do some of this stuff is for us to move the office hours, the 2.0 system into the server room, because we need tools that are we need some stuff that's in the 090 system that it's a 250-foot run every time we want to do something. So I think that if we can get it down to a 20-foot run, we can do a lot more stuff. But like, for instance, I realized today while I was trying to figure out the color stuff, that if I had the FS4s that are sitting there right now, I could color correct. And if we were using Unity, I could literally color correct and embed and have all the stuff that we're talking about, like literally next week, and then we can sit there and just tweak everybody's color live and do all those other things there. And because the FSs are all REST, we could figure out a way that you could have an interface that did all the things that needed to be done. Like you could talk to, because for instance, in the FS HDR, there's like 20 sliders or 30 sliders that I'm noodling with right now for color. But how many you need to actually color correct somebody is like 4. So if we expose those 4 to another universe, hi, Andy. Oh, anyway, to another interface, you could have somebody that sits there and does color and someone else that does audio, and they could adjust people's volumes and their quality and everything else in real time. Go ahead, Chris.
Where does this fall in the now hold on, I'm going to do active speaker. Sorry. Where does this fall in the realm of what I call fixing a problem versus solving a problem? Wouldn't it be better to get that color at least closer at the source instead of?
Yeah, I think that what you always want is to have better, garbage in, garbage out. You always want everybody. I mean, in a perfect world, in a perfect world, I would have everybody here would have a 6K camera, a 6K Blackmagic with an ATEM switcher, and I would have IP. They would all be logged in, and I would have IP control over shading their camera in real time from the system. Not that I haven't thought of it, and not that it might not happen. Let's just be clear that there may be a point where we just send you all, if we had enough sponsors for something, it'd be easy to, just this is your panelist kit, and we control it, and it just ties into the system, ties into the Borg, and if you're on enough, often enough, or whatever, we just equip you with it. I know everyone's now going to ask me
for the
that's gonna
record,
happen, but that's not going to happen.
Who gets the ingenue lens?
For
me.
the
Yeah, I
record,
get the
the
ingenue lens.
dream sentence that Alex
you get a
Lindsay
Sigma.
hopes to say one day is office hours brought to you by Black Magic.
What I guess the question for you, like what other system would be able to do that? None.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
Right. So
I'm just
the thing is,
poking the bear.
I'm not asking for Black Magic to sponsor office hours. I'm just saying I'm just using that as an example. And there's no other system that really would allow us to do that easily. That's the thing, the camera system and the switcher system and the control systems. There wouldn't be any other way to do that. So anyway, because we already do that now with webcams. We have a screen share and we go in and we make the adjustments, but there could be a point somewhere in the future where we tighten that up a lot. So to your point, Chris, we'd also want to be able to take over that camera or send you a lot, like this is a kind of the short term of this is we send you a LUT that's is the right LUT that we know works with what we're doing. And you apply that to your camera so we don't have to control it, but there could be a point where we do that. I mean, one of the systems that we're working on right now, and one of the reasons I was really interested in learning how to do the lightning, we did a lab yesterday. We're going to do another lab today. The lightning is cute. Understanding how to talk to DMX is really interesting to me because what I want to be able to do is do that via Streamweaver back to a system that's remote. Yeah. So that I can, the next generation of the kits that we're building in 090 are going to include DMX lighting, so that I can sit there and just play with your lighting to get it just right and to match all of my participants to exactly what we want it to look like. So anyway, when there's a difference when we have 150, 200 people watching, there's one level. If we get to 5 or 10,000 or 50,000 people watching, we know how to play a lot harder. so it's just a matter of scale. Next question.
And the last one we had in the queue for today is from Stefan Fischer, again from Würzburg, Germany. We are planning an online conference in March 2022 and would like to enrich the event with several shows like office hours. Should we prepare to use Zoom webinar, or do you think we could be so brave to look at office hours 2.0?
Go ahead, Andy.
I would say, go back to the last Monday where Richard Lavery talked about how he did his breakdown of a production where he brought in production value. He didn't have necessarily everything that we're doing here for 2.0 and all the hardware, but he had the basics, right? He had the ability to ingest participants into some sort of switcher or media server or whatever he needed to do, and then push design content out. And that can be a Zoom into Zoom workflow. That can be an Office Hours 2.0 workflow. That can be decentralized production workflows, Belfast method, all that stuff, right? All those different things can help improve the quality of your production. So I'd say that it doesn't have to be that diametric of a choice like Zoom webinar, stock Zoom settings as is, or 2.0. There's all sorts of things in the middle that allow you to get some level of production and some level of control that's beyond just what a Zoom webinar will give you out of the box.
2.0 would be really good if we cut to Andy while he was talking, Chris, just in case you're wondering. I looked down at my stream and I was like,
it would be wonderful, but I've lost control.
Oh, okay.
Because I had a reboot mix effect in the same time as answering a question. So I had him in one ear, you in the other ear, and my hand trying to unmute myself and restart mix effect at the same time as having a coherent answer.
I didn't even realize he was talking. I'm like, hey, Andy, I've lost all control. Oh, shit.
Yeah. So, and I think that we're, at the rate, you also want to look at the rate in the last week of what we've done between last Thursday and this Thursday has been pretty outrageous. So I think that, if we continue at a rate even near this, and one of the things I would like to say is that I do think it's important. We're doing labs right now in Isadora. They're very simple. Alex keeps on asking, how do I get an output? I don't understand where the screen is, and why is this not working? So I feel like the labs should be referred to as Alex looking stupid. Anyway, so trying to figure out the Isadora stuff, but I feel good about it only because this is what I looked like with Shake when I was learning Shake, and then after a while it was all standardized and we used it and did really complex shots with it. So I know that I'll get there. I just have to get my head around the organization of it. But I think it's really important that people jump into those labs. I know we're just getting started and it's all rough. Remember, Isadora is free until you start saving, so you can play along with the labs that we're doing. We're doing another one at 2:00 today, another one at 2:00 tomorrow. It's really important to do that because we can't expect Andy and Jonathan and everyone else to be spending the kind of time they're spending on it forever. And so we need to be able to, I mean, obviously I think that, Andy will be involved in it, for a long period of time, but he's going to, they can't, we're very fortunate right now to have that. And so it's important for us to get up to speed on how these systems work. And also I'm hoping that, especially for folks who've asked, how do we do it without all the hardware, is go in and grab, learn Isadora and Universe, go in and grab parts of what we're doing and apply it to what you're doing, and so we'll do more of that as we move forward. Right now, we're just getting our head around Isadora and so on and so forth, but we're going to have time when Andy's able to kind of walk us through how Isadora is doing this show. And also, Jonathan will walk us through, how he's doing stuff in Universe. And so I think that, we want to learn it all, so that we can continue to move forward with Andy and Jonathan's guidance, with the partnership with everyone else, but not having them feel like they have to nug through every fix and every process. Because again, I think that my goal is not that every show looks like Office Hours 2.0. It's kind of that DNA of us figuring something out, and then people grab onto the parts that they think that they want to use for their show and apply it to their show, and take the things that work for them. And then my request is that when they learn something from that, they bring it back to us, and we all learn together and keep on moving it forward. So this is a reference spec that I'm hoping that people run with and do other things with as it gets better.
590 times.
590 times. We're getting close to 600. So I have to do a presentation that includes Office Hours, and since I don't have to do it for a couple of weeks, I just said, and we've done this 600 times. So I keep on 600. So knowing that we're getting closer to it. All right. Andy, thanks so much for coming in, hanging out with us today and talking about that. Thanks to Chris for doing the edit, and Sky doing the legacy edit. As we start to call it, there's the 2.0 edit and the legacy edit. Thank you very much. Thank you to the producers for a lot of great questions. As always, a great conversation, 590 times. I don't know how that happens. I don't think there's any show that I've watched 500. I don't think there's not many shows that have been done 590 times. So, and the fact that we get to do it every day and it works every day, it's kind of crazy. So well done to the producers, and well done, of course, to the panelists. Thank you for your contribution, being here and being part of that conversation. And now we're going to jump into After Hours. Remember, tomorrow, special guest talking about events and conferences in Zoom. So I would highly recommend joining us for at least the second hour.